The Red Cape Knights consist of 3 knights, and each knight has a unit named after them. Their fame is well known, no need to mention it. However, a knight order cannot be made up of just 3 knights. The true core of the knight order lies with the junior knights, and there are over 20 of them. Of those, fewer than 5 remained in the capital. There were over 50 squires as well, but fewer than 10 were left in the capital. At least, that's what Asia explained.
Well, there are a few people who are at the level of junior knight. The captain of the royal guard is a former member of the knight order. And there are those famous twins who serve as the Marquise guards.
Were they twins?
Enkrid interrupted mid-conversation to ask.
You mentioned you met the Marquis of Octo, right? Yeah, fraternal twins. They don't look alike, do they? I was surprised too when I heard they were twins.
Asia was casual. That's how Andrew saw her. Her orange hair, though a bit split at the ends, seemed to emphasize her liveliness, casual and lively. She seemed like a carefree girl from a farm. That's the thought that crossed his mind. In terms of looks, Esther the Wizard or Kin Visar might surpass her, but in terms of charm, Asia, the squire, probably captured the hearts of many men.
With looks like that and such a bright personality.
It's hard not to find her attractive. What's more, she acted familiar with everyone, ignoring any sense of distance. The word uninhibited immediately came to mind. She joined the table naturally, eating and drinking as if she had been there yesterday as well.
Pass me some bread, will you?
The funny thing was that even Rem and the others treated her casually, and she was a squire of the Red Cape Knights. Andrew found it difficult to adjust, but he soon discarded any serious thoughts.
I give up.
When you're involved with Enkrid, nothing ever goes the way you expect. It wasn't any different from the first time he went on a mission with the captain. Back then, too, nothing seemed believable.
He acted like he knew where the enemy was hiding in the bushes.
Not to mention they fought while setting fire to the camp, and it was only after they escaped that Andrew realized this guy was something else. Now, the scale of the tasks had grown and the stakes were higher, but nothing had really changed. That's how Andrew decided to see it.
Here.
Asia sliced a round loaf of bread and tossed it. Rem caught it in midair, spread marmalade on it, and began chewing. Ragna cut some salted ham and trimmed the rough edges off the bread, eating only the soft interior.
Picky eater, aren't you?
Rem commented.
If you're itching to get hit because you saw that woman fight, hold off until after the meal, you wild animal.
Ragna replied calmly.
That woman? No, it's Asia.
Asia raised her hand to interject in the middle.
Oh, right, Asia.
Ragna casually switched his tone. Asia even thanked Andrew, the owner of the mansion, for inviting her. Of course, no invitation had been made. She had just walked in and started sparring and having dinner. Andrew responded with a polite, "Don't mention it," so as not to embarrass her.
He's got a face I like over there.
Asia commented, looking toward Jackson.
Most women say that, but don't be fooled. He's met more women than you can count.
Rem added.
They're all just friends.
Jackson unusually responded softly. Asia looked at him and thought it was likely that many women were indeed drawn to him. Just because he was her type didn't mean she had fallen for him immediately. Asia looked across the table at Enkrid, who was chewing his bread. No matter how much she looked, he was still a strange person.
I don't even have many female friends.
Enkrid, sensing her gaze, remarked.
I didn't ask. Want a spar after this?
Asia reflexively nodded.
After I've digested a bit.
During the digestion process, they would have to organize what needed to be done. Asia hadn't come here just for leisure.
We agreed to hunt the moonlight beast, didn't we?
You've already given it a name.
It only appears under the moonlight.
Not everyone in the capital was foolish or clueless. They had identified the enemy's appearance, location, and the time it showed up. Enkrid, who was listening to the explanation, asked,
Why has it been left alone then?
It was said there were 5 squires remaining. There were also squires in the city guard. This is the capital of a nation. Could there really be no one capable of handling this? Of course there were, and yet they missed it. There were several reasons for this. First, they had underestimated their opponent. Second, aside from the Knight Order, others were hesitant to reveal their own strength.
Everyone's more concerned about their own safety. I can understand that.
Asia spoke candidly and added,
One of the squires got attacked. It was a serious injury. I'm not sure if he'll make it.
for a squire, who was practically a knight in training, to be taken down indicated that the so-called moonlight beast was a considerable threat.
What about the priests?
If someone had been attacked, why had the healing been insufficient? A squire is someone recognized for their talent, chosen from among hundreds or thousands. Knights are a symbol of power, and the knight order consists of those preparing to become knights. Naturally, they are treated well, not just well, exceptionally well. Having a dedicated cook is a given, and they can always receive a priest's prayers. With divine power, even serious injuries can be healed. At the very least, they'd be restored enough to survive.
The priests in the capital aren't here at the moment. The royal palace's personal priest has other reasons preventing the use of divine power.
Enkrid recalled the temples he had seen while traveling through the capital. They existed. Not just one, but several temples. Norilia doesn't persecute religion, so there are several temples in the capital, Noril. While it's not a holy city like Legion, there are still plenty of temples here, and yet not a single priest?
To be precise, there's no priest who can use divine power. One of them has already fallen prey to the beast.
When the moonlight beast first appeared, the response was delayed. It immediately targeted one of the priests who had awakened divine power. As a result, that priest, a woman, is now barely clinging to life. She's hanging on, but just barely, fighting to survive day by day. The remaining priests capable of using divine power have headed to the border.
Divine power is rare, after all.
For now, the palace's healer has been doing what they can. There are also potions made through alchemy,
They won't die.
Asia said. She spoke calmly, but it sounded as if there was deep resentment behind her words. No, it was more like a firm determination to catch the beast.
We will catch it.
Rem added weight to her words, speaking as though it was a matter of course. And that made sense, since hunts like this were familiar to Rem.
Yeah, thanks. Your name is Rem, right?
Enkrid found Asia quite intriguing. Was she always this sociable? Previously, they hadn't had time to talk, nor was it the right situation, so he hadn't noticed. Still, back then, he hadn't had a bad impression of her.
The weather is gloomy again today.
Jackson said in a detached tone. And he was right, there wouldn't be a moon tonight either. Besides, just because the moon appeared didn't mean the beast would show up. Why was that? It was unclear, but it was something worth thinking about. The more you ponder, the more you can form a hypothesis.
Anyway, a squire was killed, and a junior knight chased it but lost it. That means the beast is incredibly fast. If we just chase it from behind like before, it'll be hard to catch.
Is there a reason the Knight Order hasn't gotten involved?
As Enkrid finished his meal and cleared his plate, a maid served him tea. Asia, after popping half an apricot into her mouth, grimaced. It seemed too sour.
What do you think?
There was no need to ask twice. It was because of the situation at the royal palace.
We serve the Queen.
They didn't leave the Queen's protection solely to the royal guard. It was about defending the throne.
So what about you?
The Marcus's power is enough to whisk away a few junior knights. They say he's raised so many serpents in his belly that they call him Hydra's gut.
At this, Andrew gave a meaningful glance. See? That's what everyone calls him. Enkrid nodded lightly. He had recognized from the start that the Marcus wasn't someone who revealed his intentions easily. But so what? The important thing was that the Moonlight Beast was connected to the Black Blade, and they needed to find the leader of the Black Blade.
Jackson's sworn enemy.
Whether they captured, killed, tortured, or turned him into jerky, that was Jackson's business. But the search itself would be serious. It was about a comrade. Though not explicitly stated, it was as good as a request. The first reason for capturing the Moonlight Beast was this. The second was for the sake of those who had been harmed. The third, well, that was the Marquis' request. Whether the opponent was Hydra's gut or some sneaky snake, it didn't matter.
So we've got time until tomorrow, right?
Enkrid asked. They couldn't do anything until the moon was up, after all. Unless the clouds suddenly parted in the middle of the night, Asia wouldn't be able to do much either.
Yeah,
So,
let's do some more.
Asia's eyes lit up as she spoke. Enkrid was also eager to cross swords with her again.
I'd like to spar with the rest of you, too.
At this, Asia's excitement flared even higher. If Sinar had been present, she would have wanted to douse her with water right away. Rem and Ragnar responded to the challenge.
Sounds good.
I'm up for it.
Neither of them were the type to back down.
Count me out.
Jackson shook his head.
I'll join.
Dunbachel added in a voice lower than usual.
Great.
Asia exclaimed with enthusiasm and headed outside. The sparring was about to begin. Everyone moved. Andrew followed as well. The 5 trainees, who had been practicing on their own, stopped what they were doing and watched the sparring eagerly. Even Mac found time to watch. This was a sparring match between junior knights. Missing it would be a loss. Of course, just watching wouldn't instantly improve their skills. But watching allowed them to mentally experience the outcome in advance, and that made a huge difference. For them, this was considered a stroke of luck. Enkrid took everything seriously. Asia was more excited than ever, sparring, eating, drinking, and eventually taking over a room in the mansion. The sky grew darker, and eventually rain poured down. It seemed they wouldn't be seeing any moonlight for a while. In the meantime, Enkrid learned more and more.
Hey, do you think all squires are the same? Are all knights the same? Were all mercenaries the same? Shall I talk about the ranking system of Norilia's soldiers? Just because someone's a lower-ranked soldier, does that mean they're all on the same level?
No, they're different. Even among lower and mid-ranked soldiers, there are clear differences in skill, and the higher you go, the more pronounced the gap becomes.
When you reach the level of a junior knight, the difference can be quite large. And I'm about average.
She had been acknowledged for her talent, but was middle of the pack in terms of skill.
There are some junior knights who are clumsy and can barely hold their own for a few rounds, but there are others who can spar against knights.
Asia's eyes sparkled as she spoke. It was as if she was declaring that she, too, would keep moving forward without stopping.
Right, I didn't know that.
It was too far and too high to tease in. Only after climbing did the differences between them become apparent. For example, in Andrew's eyes, Asia, Enkrid, Rem, and Ragnar all seemed like the same kind of monsters. However, during the sparring matches, Asia never once managed to defeat Rem or Ragnar. Whenever Rem and Ragnar faced off, Rem never managed to beat Ragnar, and Enkrid.
Is it right to stubbornly stick to the correct sword technique to break the illusion sword technique?
He was repeatedly beaten by Asia. Enkrid judged that it was difficult to defeat her in sparring.
Illusion sword.
He knew what her technique was. Through pondering and reviewing, he figured out how it worked. It planted illusions and locked down the opponent's field of vision. It disoriented the sense of distance. On top of that, it incorporated speed. No, it didn't just rely on speed. Previously, he had tried to anticipate that and strike, only to be caught by the fluid sword technique. Within the illusion sword, there hid a sword whose movements were unpredictable. It was deception in its purest form. She had thoroughly mastered the illusion sword and wielded it as her weapon. Enkrid smiled whenever he thought of it. The more challenging it was, the more motivated he became. That was the core of who Enkrid was. The rain poured for 4 days, pondering, reviewing, sparring, training. After those 4 days passed, the weather cleared up with bright sunshine. They rolled in the mud while sparring, washed up and chatted. While discussing how to catch the moonlight beast, Asia had, before anyone realized it, become friends with everyone.
Wow, a wizard? That's fascinating.
She even got along with Esther without any awkwardness.
Is this yours? What's wrong with your eyes? Wait, can you understand me?
She also greeted Odd Eyes warmly. Her sociability was not just good. It seemed like it was her special talent. Enkrid occasionally heard bits of her story.
I'm from a commoner background. It's a typical story. I happened to pick up a sword when I was young, realized I had talent. I have one more goal besides becoming a knight. It's not something I'd normally tell anyone. Here I am spilling all sorts of things. You're a bit strange. You have a knack for making people let their guard down.
And so, on the 4th day, just before sunset in the late afternoon,
There will be a full moon tonight.
Jackson said. The sky was still visible before sunset. Enkrid, standing in the middle of the training ground, looked up. The sky was clear and high, without a single cloud. Jackson was right. Even though the sun had not yet set, the faint outline of the moon could be seen. It was the shape of a full moon. The moonlight brightly illuminated the city. Even though the moonlight beast could appear at any moment, Enkrid didn't run. He simply walked at a moderate pace, his footsteps echoing softly. As he walked, occasionally glancing around, a few townspeople lighting the tall lamps acknowledged him.
Where are you headed?
One of the townspeople asked, glancing briefly behind Enkrid.
A night's stroll.
The response was calm.
It's dangerous, you know.
The familiar exchange continued. How had they gotten so friendly? Asia's eyes flicked between the two. Enkrid whispered casually.
He's a fruit seller. Lately, he's been troubled by his daughter's upcoming marriage. He said she's pretty, but she's into some lazy bum who flirts with many women.
How do you know that?
It just came up while talking.
Being so easygoing was one of Asia's specialties as well, but
I don't think I could be that casual.
as they walked forward, Enkrid spoke.
Jackson, we can find it immediately if any commotion arises.
At that, Asia glanced at the man named Jackson. He was exactly her type. Eyes that seemed to be almost closed, a neatly shaped mouth. Just from his appearance alone, he could make many women cry. Asia had a pretty good idea of what that man was capable of.
His senses are extraordinary.
For 3 days they ate, slept, drank, fought, and sparred. It had been a time filled with intense enjoyment for Asia. Was it Luagern who said it? Around the man named Enkrid, monsters swarmed. If seen through the eyes of Frog, it must be true. She knew this, but experiencing it firsthand made it all the more real. They were all monsters. How could Jackson's fighting style be summarized in one word?
Calculation.
Though Jackson initially said he wouldn't get involved, he ended up drawing his sword a few times. It wasn't the life and death duel like when he first fought with Enkrid, but he did fight. Through crossing swords, she was able to understand many things. He fought by observing movements, calculating and predicting. Everything was stored in his head, and he could see the next step. What allowed him to do this was his sharp senses. His sight and hearing were far beyond ordinary. Becoming a junior knight meant honing all 5 senses. There was no easy path to becoming a knight. Asia, being a member of a knight order herself, had undergone similar training. Yet, Jackson's senses had an exceptional quality.
If you want to move a step ahead, you must first understand how the opponent will move.
Her master's words suddenly resurfaced in her mind. The man named Jackson had done just that. He predicted her sword and moved first. She couldn't even use her specialty, targeting the sword's tip, properly. Before she could start the technique, his sword would always come flying, in a trajectory aimed precisely to disrupt her stance, or it would strike the blade's edge to divert its direction.
He has exceptional skill.
Of course, she believed that if they fought properly, she could win. He might be excellent at observing, listening, and predicting, but the force behind his longsword wasn't anything extraordinary. Not being extraordinary didn't mean the killing power of the sword was lacking, though.
I can take him.
That was Asia's judgment. If Jackson was calculation, then Ragnar was pure instinct. The problem was this instinctual monster's actions, guided by his whims, often turned out to be the right answers and the correct path.
That bastard.
His sword was similar to the one that had given her a bitter defeat and forced her to reflect on the past. A monster formed entirely from raw talent, in other words, a calculating monster, and a monster made of pure talent. Asia had never once been able to defeat Ragnar.
What is that?
A fast and heavy sword.
She suddenly asked, and the answer came back quickly. A fast and heavy sword, he said. What nonsense. It was easy to say. Making it a reality was the realm of talent. It was beyond Asia's reach. While such talent could make one envious, if she had been consumed by such jealousy, she wouldn't have reached her current level.
Does someone else's bread look bigger to you? There are plenty of people with skills better than yours. They're everywhere.
Her master's teaching resurfaced once more. This sparring session had brought Asia a lot of realizations.
My own skills are excellent, too.
Though someone else's abilities may seem appealing, the key is to surpass them and make their strengths your own. Blaming talent and retreating in the face of limits wasn't something Asia could afford. After all, what she possessed wasn't insignificant.
If the heart breaks, the will breaks, and if the will breaks, the sword breaks as well.
By repeating this mantra, she kept her jealousy as a motivating force. That was Asia's secret to growth. When she looked at Rem in that state, what could she say?
Is he a madman or a mad genius?
He was both. If Jackson was calculation and Ragna was raw instinct wrapped in talent, then Rem.
How about it? You can't stop it, right?
It was amusement. He lived for the thrill. His techniques didn't follow a consistent form. Most of it was improvised. Even when he showed off his other abilities, they were similar, unorthodox and aggressive. He ignored small injuries and charged in. Though Ragna was also spontaneous, he was different from Rem. Rem fought purely for fun. His actions were driven by his enjoyment. Naturally, this too was made possible by talent. On top of that, Rem had added his own experiences. He was a barbarian, making impossible moves possible, doing it all for the sake of fun. That was Rem.
So, what do you think?
Among all his techniques, the one that stood out the most was how he dismantled Asia's targeting the sword's tip. How could she describe it? Axe-edge targeting? Axe-edge blocking? He used his axe blade to cover the tip of her sword. With that, he completely killed the momentum her sword was gathering. It was a bold and unique move, and when he closed the distance in that state, it was, well,
Terrifying.
more terrifying than an aggressive man is a madman. A crazy barbarian like Rem looked like he'd accept a blade piercing his body if it meant more excitement and fun. But was Rem the most remarkable of them all? No. There was still Enkrid.
Fascinating, utterly fascinating.
Unique, truly unique. When Asia looked at Enkrid, she couldn't shake the sense of his distinctiveness.
It's like he's a stone carefully molded and compressed by great effort.
His foundation wasn't just solid, it was rock hard. But that didn't mean he lacked flexibility. It was a swordsmanship where the basics had been drilled into him, repeated tens of thousands of times, until they had become an intrinsic part of his body. It was as if someone had painstakingly repeated the process of crafting a ceramic jug, ensuring it would never crack, no matter how many times it was made, and that fascinated her. Normally, one develops their skills by building upon their natural talents, polishing their techniques based on their foundation. Most people hone their swordsmanship that way, developing their techniques and making them their own.
Relying on talent.
But Enkrid was the opposite. He couldn't move on unless he fully understood each and every step. His progress wasn't due to talent. It was as if he'd painstakingly repeated and analyzed every single basic move, forcing his way through every obstacle. A man who had met his limits time and time again, yet relentlessly pushed through them. That's how he seemed. Limits erode a person. They sap away their will. They make the word surrender come to mind and offer the gift of despair.
Did he surpass all that?
Probably not. It was likely her own illusion. But then how had he reached his current level? That was the real mystery. There was one thing she did understand, though.
No matter what, he has an unyielding desire to improve, and that's his foundation.
Just looking at him, the word tenacity naturally came to mind. A tenacity so intense it could make someone smile even when on the verge of death. Even while sparring with her, he never stopped training his body. When Asia saw him using Dunbachel, the beast woman, to practice taking a boulder-like object into his side, she couldn't help but click her tongue in amazement. Not even knightly training involved things like that. She had seen a priest break stones with his palms once, as part of a spiritual discipline, and that was the vibe she got from Enkrid. There was always a quiet madness when he trained, and the beast woman wasn't ordinary in skill or talent either. But was she truly exceptional? That part she wasn't sure of. Still, Asia couldn't help but wonder. How had he gathered such a group of individuals, each one unique in their own way? If she had known that this all began when the previous border guard battalion commander, now reduced to watching his back at the palace, had been left to either live or die on his own, she would have been just as dumbfounded as anyone. In any case, there was no denying that these were extraordinary people. As these thoughts settled in her mind, they arrived at a place where alleys branched off in all directions.
Let's split up here.
Enkrid spoke up, right next to her. It was a place where darkness crept into every corner. This was a zone adjacent to the slums, also home to a crime guild.
Here?
Asia asked, a bit incredulous.
Here.
Enkrid confirmed.
Why?
I'll explain as we go, only Asia comes with me. Ragna will go with Dunbachel. Jackson and Rem will split up.
If those two stuck together, trouble was bound to happen. Asia had only known them for a few days, but she already understood that much. Ragna was the type to get lost just taking a walk around the mansion.
Anyone who loses the target is a dumbass, a moron, an idiot.
Rem hummed, adding strange lyrics to an equally odd melody as he disappeared into one of the alleys.
Let's go.
Enkrid started walking into the alley, and before Asia knew it, he had grabbed onto a wall and climbed up. Some of the roofs were flimsy, made of wood and straw, but others were reinforced with solid plaster. As the city inside the walls developed, residential areas outside the upscale districts became tightly packed, with houses clumped closely together. Thanks to that, the roofs were interconnected, so as long as one had good balance, it was easy to run across them. A few buildings stood taller than the rest, and falling from those heights would certainly break a few bones, but Enkrid didn't climb that high. He merely settled onto a sturdy section of one of the roofs.
Why here?
Asia asked again. She was genuinely curious. This task wasn't really part of her duty as a knight. It wasn't something that fell within the vow she had taken for herself, but a task was still a task. Success was always better than failure. If left alone, more people would die, and for the safety of the citizens, this situation needed to be resolved. So she asked. She needed to know to respond properly.
Understanding their habits makes it easier to know your opponent,
Enkrid said. As he continued to explain, Asia found herself nodding along without realizing it.
If it only appears on nights when the moon is out, it's like a madness that can't be controlled by its own will.
That made sense. Like a type of madness, it couldn't be controlled, and since it couldn't be controlled, it left traces.
If it had full control, it wouldn't be making such a loud fuss.
This also made sense. If Asia herself had to kill people in secret, how would she go about it? She would choose a target, track their movements, and then strike in a secluded area. Even though the knights didn't focus on assassination techniques, if the job didn't require it, that would be the most efficient approach. Everyone who had been targeted so far, except for one priest,
Were commoners.
once in the slums, 3 times in the residential area. Enkrid had told her all of this. The evidence was clear from the investigation.
The rains over the past few days would have intensified the madness. If it's affected by moonlight, the full moon will trigger strong desires and urges within it.
Yes, that could very well be the case. It might not fit perfectly, but it was plausible.
If I were consumed by madness and aware of it, I would try to satisfy my urges as far away from my home as possible.
That statement meant he had already narrowed down the location of the perpetrator.
The farthest place from the slum residential district.
Asia's gaze naturally shifted past the moonlight, toward the center of the city, the area near the inner wall, close to the royal palace. A group of nobles, unable to stay inside the palace itself, resided there.
Uncontrollable desires would cause chaos, so the suspect must erase any suspicions.
The explanation concluded. Asia nodded in understanding, chills running down her spine.
When did you figure all this out?
I've been wandering around for the past few days. I pieced it together from what I heard.
How could a stone that had been trampled and hardened so much also be so sharp? Asia's eyes reflected both amazement and confusion. Enkrid brushed off her gaze easily. He had merely walked through the market a few times and gathered information from those he spoke to. Why hadn't Asia noticed?
Because she didn't care.
From the start, had she taken this matter seriously, Asia could have figured it all out herself, but she hadn't been concerned about how many commoners had fallen victim. The only reason a junior knight was even involved was because a squire had been attacked. The royal palace was too preoccupied with the civil war, so the issue of the Moonlight Beast was just a secondary problem. This wasn't the first time something strange had happened in the capital. With the Assassin's Guild walking around in broad daylight, everyone already knew that public order was a mess. Enkrid had rightly assumed no one would conduct a proper investigation, so he looked into it himself. From the first victim to the increasing number of casualties afterward, there wasn't even a need for detailed questioning. Rumors, nearly as wild as ghost stories, had spread so far that everyone knew about it. A few words with the fruit seller, a few words at the blacksmith, a few words from a guard at the gambling den. From a lumberjack, a wood merchant, a glass dealer, a minstrel, a library clerk, a barmaid, and a noble's guard. He gathered and organized everything they had told him and reached his conclusion. The monk's testimony had been especially crucial.
It was wearing clothes, a rather expensive-looking coat, and that beast, with the moonlight at its back, ignored me and went straight for the priest.
Even though it was consumed by the urge to kill, it still acted with reason. That made predicting its movements easier. While beasts or monsters acted on instinct, humans did not. They used logic. If the target was thinking and moving accordingly, you could deduce the basis of those thoughts.
The divine figure is a threat, so it's dealt with first. Then, to avoid further problems, they cause trouble far from their usual location.
A human-turned beast by madness wouldn't have stolen a fine coat. It must have been wearing it to begin with, and since there were no reports of it anymore, it likely stripped off its clothes before transforming. Jackson had guessed it was a lycanthrope. Enkrid had come to a similar conclusion, and then, ooh! A sound like the cry of a night bird echoed from somewhere nearby. Enkrid recognized it as coming from the direction Ragna had headed earlier.
Let's go.
Only then did Enkrid begin to run, and Asia followed close behind. The Southgate Guard commander adjusted his hat. The feathered hat was his trademark. After tilting the brim of his hat a few times, the commander gazed up at the bright full moon illuminating the surroundings.
What is my duty?
It is to protect the capital. This wasn't a sudden realization. He had always known, but recent events had simply reinforced it. A man who had become a noble of the royal family, known as the prodigal son who returned. As a blood relative of the queen, he had shown his duty and responsibility. Then, the guard commander, too, had to do what was required of him. In conclusion, the commander could no longer ignore the creature known as the Moonlight Beast. So, he did what needed to be done. Hearing that a squire had been attacked, he prepared thoroughly and took action.
Let's go this way.
The guard commander said to his subordinate.
But Commander, are you sure it will show up?
Asked the unkempt subordinate, who hadn't shaved in a while.
Of course.
There were others in the capital who were interested in the Moonlight Beast itself. The Southgate Guard commander was one of them. He had scouted the area and predicted the best location for the creature to appear. In other words, he acted through the same thought process as Enkrid.
Full moon.
A place far from the nobles' residences.
Here.
If he was wrong, he would just have to start again. With limited manpower, he couldn't check the entire area. He had only brought 3 reliable soldiers with him. He figured that with himself and 3 subordinates, they could handle at least one lycanthrope. He didn't know how it hid during the day and only appeared at night.
It must be some strange magic.
It was probably a spell cast by a mad sorcerer. The Southgate Guard commander surveyed his surroundings under the moonlight. Would it appear? His expectations were soon fulfilled. The sound of flesh being struck and the strong scent of blood filled the air. It was coming from inside an alleyway. He immediately dashed towards it.
Commander? Follow me!
He commanded as he rushed forward. Sure enough, inside the alleyway, he saw a blood-soaked creature. Pointed ears that jutted upwards, a body covered in steel-like feathers instead of fur. It was twice the height of a human, with arms as thick as a man's thigh. It seemed to fill the entire alleyway. The path was wide enough for 3 grown men to walk side by side. The commander swallowed hard. If fear took hold, even a winnable fight would be lost. He steeled himself and spoke.
So it's not a werewolf, but an owlman.
He drew his sword as he spoke. With a sharp sound, the sword was drawn, reflecting the moonlight. The commander gripped the sword with both hands and stared at his opponent. The owlman, a creature known as an owlbear, was in profile. Between its round eyes, he could see red veins. The veins were so thick they were visible even in the moonlight. He had to tilt his head back to meet its eyes. As his gaze moved from its eyes, it traveled down its entire body and reached the ground. The ground was soaked in blood, with a mangled corpse lying to one side, entrails tangled between the sharp claws of the creature, torn flesh, broken bones, and the dark, murky crimson hue that persisted even under the moonlight. Each of the owlbear's claws was like a thick, deadly blade. The owlbear shook its body, completely ignoring the commander's gaze. The commander instinctively knew that this beast was relishing the moment. It was drunk with pleasure. It found joy in the slaughter.
Enjoying yourself, are you?
To protect the city, to protect the citizens. It was the guard's duty to kill the creature that turned moonlit nights into a time of terror. He pushed off the ground and lunged forward, stabbing his sword downward in a vertical slash. He closed the distance in a single step, aiming to cut off an arm or slice through its body. Though he didn't expect to sever a limb in one stroke, if he angled his blade correctly, he could carve off a chunk of flesh. This move, a single slice carving technique, was his specialty. The owlbear blocked it with just a swing of its arm. It saw the angle of the incoming blade and precisely adjusted its index claw to deflect the sword with the outer edge. One claw collided with the blade. Sparks flew as the blade met resistance. The moment the blade was blocked, the commander quickly retreated. He wasn't skilled enough to join the knight's order, but he was capable of handling most opponents. At least he judged himself to be at a squire's level. That's why he had been promoted to commander. But this, what was this? Hadn't a squire barely managed to defeat it?
Even if I didn't swing with all my strength.
The force of the parry nearly tore his grip apart. But more than that, what was that movement just now? It was as if the creature had learned swordsmanship with the angles and defense it used. I'm being pushed back. If I fight alone, I'll die. It was obvious I'd end up like that squire. Fortunately, he wasn't alone. Cold sweat poured down his face, but instead of succumbing to fear, he boldly leaped backward and shouted,
Surround it!
The owlbear's eyes turned towards him. Joy, desire, bloodlust, hostility, all mixed within its brown eyes. The blood vessels bulging red stirred a primal fear. Even without opening its beak, it looked like one wrong move would see him impaled by that sharp point, especially those eyes. The fact that they resembled human eyes made them all the more unsettling. But there was no time to dwell on such thoughts. As he retreated, the owlbear lazily followed, its steps slow and deliberate. When it reached the mouth of the alley, his three subordinates had their spears aimed at it. The moonlight hit the front of the alley in such a way that the inside appeared even darker. One of the nervous soldiers gulped, spear still pointed forward. Meanwhile, the commander was drenched in cold sweat. The owlbear slowly stepped out. Despite its massive size, its steps were unnervingly quiet. If it had intended to ambush them, they wouldn't have even sensed it coming. It moved like a natural predator. As it emerged from the alley, it took note of the men pointing their weapons at it and inhaled deeply. Its chest expanded.
Attack!
The commander judged that attacking first was the best option and shouted. It was a desperate cry from a man facing overwhelming odds. Despite the unexpected strength of the enemy, his sense of duty remained unchanged. The commander's shout was swallowed by the creature's roar. Ooh! The monster's howl tore through the air, overpowering the commander's command. Its roar slammed into their ears like a physical blow. At the sound of the owlbear's cry, the commander felt his entire body freeze. His heart began pounding wildly, and every muscle tensed up. He was paralyzed. Prey cannot escape the grip of fear when confronted by a predator. That's why monsters are known as the natural predators of humans. Among the strongest monsters, some had the ability to paralyze humans with just their roar. The commander envisioned the owlbear's claws tearing into his throat, digging into his chest. The vision of his own death left him frozen in place, and his men were no different.
I'm going to die.
The fear of death consumed his body. It was the kind of roar that powerful monsters use to instill terror, like a mouse freezing in place before a cat. With just its howl, the creature had neutralized the group surrounding it. It raised its claws, preparing to sever their heads and drink their brains, because that would be the finest delicacy. A laugh escaped it. The ultimate pleasure, impossible to find in human life, was here. At first it had cursed the state of its body, but no more. It was joy, pure joy. There was no reason to deny it. As long as it didn't encounter another squire like before, it would be fine. But really, who in the capital could even pose a threat now? What would they send after it? 2 squires at best? The guard? The ones lying collapsed before it made the situation clear. The capital was now its dining hall. There was an endless supply of prey to devour, so how could it not be happy? Pleasure surged, and joy consumed its body. Each of its feathers quivered in anticipation of the feast to come. Its muscles rippled and tensed as it prepared for the enjoyment ahead. It was time to fully savor this moment.
Hoo-hoo-hoo.
Drool dripped from its mouth. The urge to devour them was overwhelming. It was time to stop thinking and thrust its claws forward. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of feet striking the ground reached its ears. Behind to the left, about 20 steps away by human measure. Since becoming an owlbear, its hearing had become sharper than anything else. Judging the distance by sound alone was effortless. The owlbear calculated that the sound was getting closer. Its beastly instincts moved faster than human logic. It extended its claws, making them twice as long as before, and crossed its arms in front of itself defensively. In the alleyway, in the shadows, the owlbear's keen vision locked onto the object charging towards it. Its nocturnal eyesight allowed it to see as clearly as if it were daylight. A white streak came flying out of the darkness. The streak suddenly accelerated. Something much faster than the sound of footsteps hurtled toward it. The owlbear saw the lines being drawn before its eyes. They started from the figure's arm and aimed to slash through its body, forming 2 distinct arcs. Reacting instinctively, the owlbear raised its arms to block. It lifted its arms horizontally as if they were shields. The incoming strikes collided with its forearms. The sound was dull. The owlbear felt the impact. While its steel-like feathers hadn't been cut, the force of the blow still left a mark. The one who swung the strikes retreated faster than they had attacked. The owlbear responded immediately, thrusting its right foot toward where the figure had been, but they had already evaded. Its claws swiped through the spot just vacated by the opponent. Straightening its stance, the beast tilted its head as it spoke.
What's this? There's another one. Looks like there's plenty to eat.
It appeared as a beast, half man, half animal, transformed into a monstrous form, and yet it spoke human words with ease. As it spoke, the owlbear used its keen sense of smell and hearing to determine there was more than one opponent, but it couldn't afford to shift its attention. The aura radiating from the foe in front of it demanded all of its focus. The one who had sent those twin strikes glared fiercely at the owlbear. Striking golden eyes shone brightly. Even in the moonlight, they retained their full color.
Hey, I'm a beast woman.
The words were directed at the owlbear.
What's the difference? I used to be human too, and now I'm an owlbear.
Though it was angry at having its pleasure and joy interrupted, it saw no need to fight a fellow creature. There was plenty of food, and the dining hall was vast. There was no need to quarrel over the source of pleasure. In front of its claws, it didn't matter if the prey was an old man, a child, a man, or a woman. The opponent, who had declared themselves a beast woman, clenched their teeth and shouted furiously.
You bastard. There are no owls among beastmen.
With that, Dunbachel launched forward like a white lion. Bam! She pushed off the ground, her body elongating. In her hands were 2 scimitars, slightly shorter than a typical scimitar, but she had grown accustomed to their use. The blades carved through the air, aiming for the owlbear's forearm, cutting in a fluctuating rhythm. This was a technique she had devised after days of practice, called the falling stab. She had observed Enkrid learning his techniques and had recreated her own from what she saw. Slash turns into a stab, and a stab into a slash, unpredictable and chaotic. But the owlbear's heightened senses perceived everything. Its monstrous body responded to all the movements and trajectories. Its claws, harder than steel, met the strikes head-on. It blocked and deflected them, looking for an opening. Even in its human life, it had spent time training. It knew how to counter most techniques. It aimed once again for the beast woman's vulnerable point, extending its foot. The claws grew long, threatening to tear open Dunbachel's abdomen. But she pivoted on her left foot and spun, swinging the scimitar in her hand as she turned. This strike was twice as fast as the previous one, carving through the air horizontally. The owlbear had only extended its foot and didn't advance further.
This one's tricky.
This one fights even better than the squire. So is that a problem? He concluded it wasn't. Even if things go south, he can just run.
What the hell? So you were an owl freak?
He couldn't finish his thought. From behind him, he saw someone wielding a long-handled axe, twirling it effortlessly.
That face seems familiar.
Where have I seen him before? He searched his memory. He couldn't recall. However, the aura radiating from the figure was far from ordinary.
Should I flee?
Ignoring an instinctual warning would be a mistake. His rational mind was telling him the same thing.
If you just answer my questions, you can leave peacefully.
At that moment, a voice came from directly behind him. He was so startled that he reflexively swung his elbow. With steel-like feathers acting as weapons, a direct hit would have turned any human into a mashed pulp. But the blow didn't land. The speaker had retreated, as if they had anticipated his reaction. They moved away faster than the strike could reach. The owlbear felt the shift in the air and sensed it.
Who is the leader of the Black Blade Bandits?
The person asked. Instead of answering, the owlbear compressed air into its belly and let out a roar. Ooh, in still fear. This was the purpose of its roar. The monster's power reverberated through the atmosphere. At least one of them should be trembling in their boots or collapsing in terror. Just like that soldier earlier. The man with the feathered hat barely held his ground, but one of the other soldiers had collapsed, wetting himself in fear. Though the men grimaced in reaction to the roar, none of them appeared to have met his expectations. Why are they all fine? The one holding the axe even smirked.
Shut up, you monster.
Then another human approached. A man walked toward him from one side, his footsteps steady, holding a long whip in his hand.
What's this? You out for a midnight stroll too?
The one with the axe asked. The man with the whip was a familiar face to the owlbear.
Shouldn't he be elsewhere right now?
His name was Matthew, the bodyguard of Dianeth Rangdias Nauril, a man who had caused a stir within the royal palace, claiming the Grand Duke's title for himself. It was partly thanks to him that the owlbear had been able to enjoy its meals freely during this chaotic time. The more turmoil there was in the palace, the fewer people would care about him. A few disappearances at night wouldn't cause an uproar. At most, the city guard would be dispatched. The Moonlight Beast only targeted commoners, especially the poor. It never dared go after nobles, avoiding the backlash that would bring. As long as it didn't harm anyone in its own territory, who would even care? But now, all of this was unexpected. The owlbear couldn't comprehend why this was happening. There were people who would pursue it not for personal gain, but for the safety of the citizens. There were those who would risk their lives, driven by a sense of duty and responsibility, to chase it down. There were people who, with their natural insight and sharp perception, had figured out its patterns of behavior. The owlbear couldn't fully grasp all of this. Like an addict seeking another fix, it had become a creature addicted to slaughter. Yet, despite all this, it still considered itself a rational being. It believed it made decisions based on logical reasoning and acted accordingly. It was all nonsense. Its rational mind had merely become a tool for seeking pleasure. This was a side effect it wasn't even aware of.
What's going on here? Who are you people?
The South Gate Guard commander also rose to his feet and spoke. He had barely managed to overcome his fear. Though his jaw trembled, he clenched his teeth and held on. That made him feel a little better. The change in the atmosphere around him also contributed to his growing sense of calm. The momentum had shifted. The owlbear couldn't finish off the soldier it had knocked down. It couldn't tear apart the white lion beast woman that had charged at it. The monster felt a sense of danger. It recognized that the situation was taking a strange turn, but that didn't mean it could simply accept death.
Absolutely not.
Not after having tasted pleasure. It couldn't forget that. It would survive and live that way again. It would chew and swallow countless humans, feasting on their brains, blood, and entrails. Ooh! With a short roar, it steeled its will and determination. Even if the path it chose was wrong, its willpower was unwavering. The owlbear had managed to seriously wound the squire. This was made possible by the combination of its monstrous strength and the intellect it retained from its human self.
Pathetic.
The owlbear shouted. The roar carried a clear meaning. Those who heard it reacted.
Why can it speak so well?
Said the one wielding the axe.
Are you here under the orders of the Viscount? So he said he would handle it himself.
Matthew muttered, paying more attention to the people around him than to the monster.
Shut up, you monster.
The beastman said, scowling. The man standing behind hadn't even drawn his sword. He simply stared, observing without emotion. Yet despite this, the owlbear was terrified. Going near that one would mean certain death. It wasn't human reasoning, but the instinct of the monster that told it so. And the instinct was right. Ragnar was just moments away from deciding whether or not to strike, and then,
Who is the leader of the Black Blade Bandits? Tell me, and I'll make sure you die quickly, without being hacked to death by that savage's axe or torn apart by the reckless swordsman.
a calm, commanding voice spoke from behind. Who the hell was this guy, and why did he keep talking about sending it somewhere?
Let's do this the easy way,
He said. The figure standing in the moonlight was visible, yet blurry. The owlbear realized why. The sounds around him seemed muffled and his presence felt faint, almost as if he could disappear and reappear behind it in an instant, ready to drive a blade into its back. He was unsettling.
Answer.
I don't know anything about that.
The owlbear, losing its composure, blurted out a reply without even realizing it.
I see.
The figure muttered and took a step back. Even that slight retreat eased the pressure considerably. Of course, that didn't mean the danger had lessened. The owlbear was on high alert, frantically searching for a way to escape, and then
Commander of the Guard.
another voice broke in. This was a voice the owlbear recognized. It was too chaotic to tell how many were coming. The owlbear's gaze turned toward the one who had just spoken. The beast saw a familiar face and instinctively called his name. Enkrid glanced around, first assessing those who had arrived and the man wearing the feathered hat before fixing his gaze on the beast. Their eyes met. In that moment, Enkrid organized a few facts in his mind. The opponent knows him. The opponent is likely a noble. They are connected to the Black Blade Bandits. They are in the process of transforming into a monster. They know how to use that transformation. Their brown eyes resemble someone familiar. A name surfaced, a trained body, a stench of indulgence. Someone who always emphasized manners. Someone he hadn't seen for a while. But wasn't that person serving under Count Molson? If that's the case, does this mean Count Molson and the Black Blade Bandits are in league together? A few new questions arose, but Enkrid had a good idea of who he was facing, so he spoke.
Viscount of Bentra.
Just from looking, he could identify them. His finely tuned instincts told him so. It was then that Bentra realized why these people looked familiar. They were the ones he had brushed past once while entering the royal palace, and as soon as he recognized that, he pushed off the ground. He intended to flee, because he knew what these people, those from the so-called madman platoon, had done. But his escape was unsuccessful. As soon as he jumped, a disc flew overhead. His instincts reacted as soon as he heard the sound. If he jumped upward, he would die. It was an absurdly fast-throwing axe. Even his transformed, monstrous body couldn't withstand it, so he dodged. Instead of jumping upward, the owlbear lowered its head. It crouched down, halting its attempt to escape.
Yes, I'll cut you down.
The blond swordsman approached, speaking as he came closer. He was the one radiating that ominous aura since earlier. No sooner had he finished speaking, he rushed forward, his sword striking downward like lightning from above. The monster-transformed Bentra crossed his arms upward to block, feathers puffing out across his body. Clang, crack, snap. The blade seemed to be stopped, but it still cut halfway through his arms. A terrifying scream erupted, a mix of human and monster agony.
This is for our comrades.
During that moment, Asia, who had accompanied Enkrid, thrust her slender sword toward his heart. She had been standing quietly behind Enkrid as if she wasn't there, before darting forward with a lethal strike.
Damn it.
The owlbear tensed the muscles in its chest and leapt back, preventing the sword from piercing his heart. With a soft thunk, the thin blade slid in between feathers, muscles, and flesh, and then out again. As the sword withdrew, a stream of darkened blood followed. The opponent was a junior knight of the order. No, that wasn't even the real issue. There were at least 5 others here with similar skill to junior knight Asia. Whether he turned into an owlbear or an ancient, legendary owlbear, it wouldn't have mattered. From the start, this was a fight he couldn't win. He was here to search for something, not to fight. In other words, the battle would be over by the time the moon rose. If the junior knights or the Knight Order hadn't stepped in, maybe things would have been different. But since they had, this was the inevitable outcome. The surprising part was that Krang had sent guards, and that the head of security himself had intervened. Then again, at least a few people were concerned about the city's safety and order, so it wasn't all bad. Ooh, Bentra let out a few more howls. May, he endured while cursing out loud. One. In the end, he begged for his life. Watching this, the Southern Border Guard commander in the feathered hat momentarily blamed himself for not recognizing his opponent.
They're all monsters.
What else could you call someone with the skill to toy with a literal monster like an owlbear? Only then did he realize that the rumors about the border guard were true. Even in the capital, people still called it nonsense, saying it was exaggerated talk.
Bastards, they don't know anything.
The guard commander, who had narrowly escaped death, felt a strong urge to rip apart the mouth of the bastard who had been spouting such crap. The owlbear, who had been holding on, had a hole punched through its thigh, and its head was smashed. Finally, its neck was half severed by an axe blade. Bentra, who had been entertaining the onlookers, collapsed to the ground, blood gushing out as dark crimson under Rem's handiwork. He fell forward, face first, collapsing as if his legs gave out. As the blood of the beast drained out from his fatal wounds, the transformation was undone. He returned to his human form. The feathers fell away, and his entire body shuddered. The flow of blood, which had been gushing out, began to slow significantly. Just because he returned to a human didn't mean his fatal injuries disappeared. Burn. Lying on the ground, Bentra coughed up blood, and Enkrid approached, crouching down in front of him.
Why are you here?
He asked. Of course, Bentra had no intention of answering. However, as death approached, regret surged within Bentra, and he spoke with resentment. His resentment wasn't directed at Enkrid. It was aimed at the one who had turned him into this. Indulging in desire and pleasure was just a side effect, not something he had truly wanted. Though he had lost his humanity when he turned into a monster, in his dying moments he regained a part of it. That's why he felt it was unfair.
How did you become a monster?
Enkrid asked. Bentra muttered as he died. The light in his eyes slowly dimmed. He would die soon. Enkrid couldn't ask any more questions. Bentra summoned all his remaining strength. Without revealing this, he wouldn't be able to rest, even in death.
But I will keep moving forward.
Count Molson nodded as he received the report.
He was discovered and killed earlier than expected.
The subordinate standing in the middle of the study said, while the Count, leaning back in his chair, answered indifferently.
It's fine. He was a discard anyway.
Was it Enkrid and his group again? They were certainly causing quite a headache. Even so, the Count was sincere when he said it was fine.
But I will keep removing ready.
Less than 2 weeks left.
Good.
It would be a night lit by the full moon. The Count, who had been enjoying wine by moonlight, set his glass down and spoke.
Your Majesty, Gawain.
By then, whether he or the Queen would sit on the throne would be clear. In front of Bentra's corpse, now back in human form, the Southern Border Guard commander in the feathered hat saluted Enkrid.
Please forgive my earlier rudeness.
There's no need for that.
Guarding the gate was simply part of the job after all,
We're grateful for your assistance.
the commander said. Enkrid brushed it off. He figured anyone in his position would have done the same. What concerned him more was what Viscount Bentra had said before crossing the river.
But, are you sure it's okay for you to be away from your post?
Enkrid asked Matthew. He didn't know what was happening inside the palace, but he understood that it wasn't an ordinary situation. So why had Krang's bodyguard come here?
If there are no people, there is no country. If there are no citizens, there is no king.
Matthew replied. Enkrid understood. It must have been a message from Krang. If you turned a blind eye to people being killed by the beast of the moonlight and still claimed to be king, it wouldn't mean anything to him. That resonated deeply with Enkrid. Krang was the kind of person who made you want to help, naturally.
Anyway, it seems like we handled things well.
Enkrid spoke, and Rem, feeling a bit let down, suggested they spar. Ragnar wiped off the blood and grease from her sword. On one side, Dunbachel picked up her curved blade and nodded.
Good, this.
She seemed completely satisfied, after being handed what had once been in the assassin's possession.
But was there another guy with that stench?
Enkrid asked. Dunbachel shook her head.
I didn't see anyone with a similar smell.
Then, what else was out there, and if there was more, would it have stayed this quiet? Was there more than one moonlight beast? No, the enemy had indulged in the blood of the beast. They succumbed to their instincts, seeking pleasure through the tool of slaughter. Even without the words of the Southern Gate Guard commander, this was a conclusion drawn from the information gathered during their investigation. Enkrid wondered if Bentra had just been babbling nonsense as he was dying, but at that moment Bentra had been sincere. Enkrid wasn't dull enough to miss that. So what was out there? What was left? It wasn't in the capital, so what was it? What else was there? After a brief moment of thought, he spoke.
Count Molson is making chimeras.
With that one sentence, Enkrid reached his conclusion.
Hey, we need to report this to the palace right away,
Asia said, and then she left. It didn't matter if it was the middle of the night, this was something urgent.
That.
Before she left, Matthew approached. In the end, they hadn't even gotten to see him use his whip. The ones who had taken down the owlbear were Rem, Ragna, Dunbachel, and Asia.
Do you have something to say?
Matthew, after hesitating a few times, seemed to steel himself, biting his teeth once before opening his mouth.
Help, my lord.
All right.
When danger comes, just once.
Okay.
I
I said I'd help.
What did he think was the reason Enkrid hadn't left and gone home yet? It was to fight alongside Krang after seeing what he had set in motion. Krang would become the king Narilia needed. Moreover, by sending his whip guard here, he had added actions to his words, proving his intent. He said he would care for the country, the people, and the citizens. He said he would become that kind of king. At the same time, he had said they would become friends. If he was that kind of person, even if Enkrid didn't become his knight right away, it was more than enough reason to wield a sword for him. Enkrid had already thought about it, so his answer came quickly. It was so quick that Matthew was taken aback by it.
He's not someone who'll stop by my side, so I won't even ask for help.
That was something Krang had said directly. He had said he would handle this matter with his own strength. It was a gamble, but if it wasn't a gamble, he wouldn't be able to win.
Then,
Matthew also turned and left. By the time morning came after the night passed, a piece of news reached Andrew's estate. It wasn't about what had happened that night. The news of Viscount Bentra's death had been buried. Everyone was keeping quiet about it. Even the story of capturing the Moonlight Beast had already been forgotten. The news that was delivered was about the upcoming ceremony to grant the Grand Duke title. It was a signal sent by Krang. Perhaps because of that, Asia didn't show up anymore. It felt empty without her, after spending several days together.
What's going on? Isn't that Junior Knight coming anymore?
Rem was looking for her.
There's a title-granting ceremony coming up. She's probably busy.
Enkrid answered, drenched in sweat. He also felt regretful.
If I could have sparred 200 more times, it would have been good.
Then he might have been able to break through the tip of her sword. Of course, it would take a lot more time to truly overwhelm and defeat Asia. Still, it was a shame. She was an opponent he wanted to face dozens, hundreds more times.
Well, since it's disappointing, I'll just have to beat up the captain. Let's go.
Rem, clicking his tongue, scratched the itch that had been bothering him. Enkrid felt the same way. The internal affairs of the royal palace were changing day by day, all according to Krang's plan, and Krang was adding fuel to the fire.
Are we just going to sit by and watch? A Grand Duke. Is he digging his own grave?
It was something that had made all the nobles rise in uproar. In a palace where a marquise title was the highest rank, the queen had declared she would bestow the title of Grand Duke on Krang.
Where has Viscount Bentra gone?
Viscount Mearns asked. He was the one who had unified all the factions in the palace. The reason the scattered factions had come together was largely due to the existence of Krang on the other side. Having gathered the support of Marcus Vizar and several other nobles, Krang had immediately aligned himself with the queen, aiming to receive the title of Grand Duke. Everything he did was a threat to the noble class. From institutional reforms aimed at strengthening royal power, everything he did was something they couldn't just sit back and watch. It was clear that he needed to be eliminated. He was a danger to the entire noble class. Although the queen appeared to be backing him, the rule was always to remove the loudest voice first.
Is he being arrogant just because he has the queen's support?
Viscount Mearns judged that everything Krang was doing was ultimately the queen's will.
Why, Your Majesty?
This would eventually lead to catastrophe. It was inevitable. The factions had united, and the power they gathered would cause problems if not unleashed. The queen was digging her own grave. The title-granting ceremony was set for a week later. Viscount Mernez began to move the assassination guild. He also used the power that had supported him from behind. The remaining forces of the Black Blade bandits entered the palace. He placed his loyal members among the royal guard. He also informed those knights who had defected of the call to arms.
This is loyalty.
The tide had already turned. Civil war would only rot the country from within, so the best solution was to quell everything before it even began. If the queen insisted on using her newly found brother as a shield,
That brother will die.
then the queen would no longer pull stunts like this. She would simply become a puppet sitting on the throne. After that, the true king would take his place.
That's where my job ends.
The Viscount muttered quietly. Everything would end the day before the title-granting ceremony. The current ripples. The only source of light in the pitch-black darkness illuminates the surroundings. Following the trace of light, a figure holding a lamp can be seen on the ferry. Enkrid's body was placed in a long ferry boat, drifting along the river. Was it just an illusion that the boat had grown larger and longer than before? It had been a long time since his last dream. The ferryman stood on the opposite side, holding the oar.
It's been a while.
Enkrid said. Eyes, nose, mouth, and skin could now be seen. His skin was like parched land, dry and cracked. The gray, fissured surface held no trace of humanity. It was still difficult to read any expressions, but compared to their first meeting, there was more to be seen. At least now, the eyes, nose, and mouth were visible. Moreover, the ferryman could now speak. His mouth opened, forming a line that briefly parted before closing again. It was impossible to decipher the meaning from the brief opening and closing of his lips.
This wall will be interesting,
he said. His heavy, deep voice felt like a blunt hammer. Words, once spoken, reached the listener. There is no faster weapon than that. Enkrid felt as though his heart had been struck by the hammer that was the ferryman's words without even having the chance to defend. The shock spread through his entire body. His body trembled. He felt vibrations. It stirred the primal fear inherent in every human. That's how the ferryman affected him. But Enkrid,
I look forward to it.
He responded. He enjoyed it all. In this place, there was no heart of the beast, no focus point, no mastery of techniques, nor his trained body. Only the essence of his being remained. Enkrid responded with his core will, conviction, and determination. He truly enjoyed it. Sincerely and wholeheartedly, he enjoyed even this situation. It was a statement born from deep within him. The trembling of his heart, the shock reverberating through his body. These would all become stepping stones for what came next. It was the anticipation that overcame fear. Could there be a day when these were not stepping stones? Perhaps. But no, it was a contradiction, a self-contradictory statement. Yet for Enkrid it made perfect sense.
There is something to learn from a flower blooming in the field.
There is something to learn from the stars in the night sky. There is something to learn even from the dandelion seeds carried by the wind. Contemplate, ponder, agonize, think, and think again. Do not forget that everything can become part of your sword. Mentors, instructors, mercenaries, Rem, Ragna, Jackson, Auden, along with Esther, Dunbachel, Teresa, Krang, Andrew, and recently Asia, and countless others, the ones slain by his sword. The enemies during that repeated first day, the swordsmen of the Hurrier family, wizards, magic, sorcery, the traps of strategy, everything was a lesson.
Is it madness or resolve?
The ferryman asked. His figure slowly blurred. This was a dream, a realm within the mind. Soon Enkrid would wake up.
Or is it the outcry of the ignorant?
The ferryman gazed at Enkrid. The color of his eyes constantly shifted. They turned blue, then red, and from red to pitch black. At times they glowed violet before resembling the bark of a dark tree. It was only then that Enkrid realized he was directly staring into the ferryman's eyes for the first time.
Now you even meet my eyes.
The ferryman's voice was heard again. There was a faint sense of admiration mixed in. With that, Enkrid opened his eyes.
It's been a while.
It had been a long time since he'd had a dream with the ferryman. It seemed like ages since he last saw him. Lately, he hadn't repeated today. Was that why he had let his guard down? Was it because he hadn't encountered the repeating day? No, he hadn't let his guard down. Not when capturing the Moonlight Beast, not when facing off against Asia. As his thoughts shifted towards Asia, their sparring session resurfaced in his mind. There was regret, deep regret. It would have been far more interesting if they had fought longer. There was still much left to learn, but she had left. From Asia, there was a discipline that even Rem, Ragna, and Jackson didn't show easily.
Is it because she built her foundation in the Knight Order?
It was graceful, yet upright. Though it was called the Phantom Blade, it was entirely different from the Valen mercenary sword technique.
The Phantom Blade deceives and confuses the opponent.
The technique utilizes the opponent's concentration rather than mere deception. It's a method that might not work against seasoned warriors or swordsmen. Perhaps for those below the level of a junior knight, or even a squire, they might disregard Asia's targeting the sword's tip and simply swing their own sword. Ignorance at times can appear bold when one doesn't understand what's happening. Of course, at that level, an opponent wouldn't even require the use of targeting the sword's tip. Even in the short time they fought, there was still much to learn. He maintained the same mindset as in his dream. There is something to learn even from a dandelion seed carried by the wind.
Everything that happens around me is my teacher.
If there is a lesson, he would think deeply, ponder over it, and learn. Though Enkrid wasn't consciously aware of it, his desire for improvement always boiled within him. It was the drive to become better, the desire to move forward, the ambition to improve his skills, his level, and his techniques. Naturally, this led to an active attitude, and it didn't stop there. He would also reflect on himself. Now he knew that was the quicker path. There are times when rest is important, and when it's more necessary to take a step back and look from a distance. Now, he knew that too. Things he hadn't realized when he was meeting and learning from numerous instructors. Only now did he start to see, understand, and reflect on them one by one. Enkrid knew that the time that had passed had not been in vain. With these thoughts, he rose and began his daily routine again. Once outside, he bounced on the spot to warm up his body. After that, he performed the unique isolation technique, which involved loosening each joint and stretching his muscles. Then, with Andrew's assistance, he stood before the stacked garden stones, gripping them in both hands and pulling as he rose. This was a process that strengthened the back of his thighs, the core of his body, and the quadriceps as he squatted and stood. Before he knew it, he had forgotten the dream of the ferryman and his drive for improvement. All that remained in him was pure zeal.
Aren't you tired of it?
Andrew, who had come out late, clicked his tongue.
Tired of what?
Enkrid asked in return, catching his breath during a brief break.
What you're doing. No, I mean all of it.
From strengthening his body every morning, then further training by being struck by Dunbachel's stones or Rem's fists. After that, practicing swordsmanship and handling various weapons. Then more sparring, followed by more training. In the spare time, he teaches both himself and his trainees. It was a schedule that seemed excessive even for one day, yet he carried it out every day without batting an eye. Andrew couldn't believe a human could do such things. His question came from that sentiment. Not to mention, he'd recently come back from slaying something called a moonlight beast or whatever it was, a person or a monster. He had spoken of it as casually as if he had gone for an evening stroll. From Andrew's perspective, he wondered if Enkrid was even human anymore. His life now was far more ruthless than before. Even when Andrew had served under him in the past, he thought Enkrid's training was brutal, but compared to then, despite Enkrid's current prowess, his training had only increased. It was more intense, more extreme.
Honestly.
Enkrid began.
Honestly.
Andrew prompted when Enkrid didn't immediately continue.
It's just too much fun. I could die from it.
Andrew's lips half opened, then closed, opened again, and closed once more. He couldn't find the words, but if he didn't say something to express all of his awe, his chest would feel suffocated. So, he turned his head slightly to the side and muttered under his breath, out of earshot.
Crazy bastard.
Even though it was whispered, Enkrid of course heard it. Jackson, who had suddenly appeared, gave Andrew a piece of advice from behind.
He can hear everything.
Huh?
Startled by not sensing his presence, Andrew turned his head back and asked.
The captain has sharp ears.
Jackson kindly repeated. Andrew's doubtful gaze shifted to Enkrid.
I didn't hear you call me a crazy bastard.
Oh.
Andrew sighed.
Let's start the training.
That day, the isolation technique was specially tailored for Andrew. The human body adapts. If the intensity remains the same every day, one is bound to weaken. Thus, the training must be harder, more intense. Enkrid gifted Andrew with such a challenge.
Why us?
The 5 trainees had to undergo more intense training as well, so they began to feel a tinge of resentment. Their eyes were filled with something akin to complaint.
They seem to have some energy left, huh?
Rem laughed as he noticed. Where did they get that look in their eyes? Resentment? Resentment?
Good. Very good.
Rem chuckled. Upon seeing this, the faces of the 5 trainees turned pale. Ragnar didn't appear at the training ground until late morning. Compared to before, he seemed like a completely different person. It looked like it would be another ordinary day, except for the fact that tomorrow was Krang's crown ceremony. But things were different. Enkrid sensed the change in the air.
It's oddly quiet.
Rem, with his beast-like instincts, picked up on the same scent. Dunbachel noticed it too.
Let's gear up,
Enkrid said. Rem nodded without a word. Everyone began to move. Enkrid, too, started gathering his equipment.
6 whistling daggers.
They would come in handy if the timing was right. He took 3 swords, wrapped his body in bandage-like armor, and over that he wore a leather gambeson. It was an armor with a lining made of tough fabric. Because of this, it restricted his movements slightly, holding his body tightly, but it wasn't enough to be a major hindrance. It was a gift from Andrew.
Gather your gear.
It was right after the morning training had ended. At Enkrid's command, Andrew and the 5 trainees also grouped together.
What's going on?
Mac asked. Did he sense the ominous air as well, or was he just anxious after seeing Enkrid and the others preparing?
The atmosphere isn't good.
Dunbachel answered. Ragnar from one side was gathering his swords and strafing a short sword to his waist. He then tightened the laces on his boots. As Enkrid began checking all his equipment from his sword belt onward, he cast his gaze around the mansion, listening carefully.
There's nothing, right?
Rem wasn't wrong when he remarked how quiet it was. Jackson nodded at Enkrid's words. Instead of his usual longsword, Jackson had a forearm-length sword strapped to his waist. Sensing the ominous atmosphere, Jackson immediately surveyed the area. There was no one around the mansion. Even on what should have been a busy street, not even a single dog was in sight. A few people could be seen hiding inside their homes beyond the cleanly swept stone path. Had someone cleared the area? No. It was more likely that the residents were avoiding coming near this mansion. The surroundings were already encircled by troops. Soldiers dressed as guards, armed with spears and swords, were particularly noticeable. There were over 20 of them. Enkrid dismissed them. They weren't enough to do much. Then what were they planning? For now, his backing was Krang. Marcus, too. Would they dare act, ignoring that?
What are they up to?
He even felt a tinge of excitement. As they waited for a moment, Esther suddenly lifted her head. Her eyes met Enkrid's. Esther, who had been lying quietly, had suddenly snapped her head up, reacting to something.
A spell.
More accurately, it was the interference of mana. Someone had cast some magical trick in the area. Nothing was happening yet, but if left unchecked, they could do whatever they were preparing for. There's a saying that in a battle between wizards, the one who prepares first wins. It means that knowing and preparing for your opponent gives you an advantage.
Do they know me?
From a magical perspective, they might. Although she rarely revealed herself, hadn't she killed Galaf, who controlled the river? One of his disciples might have recognized her trace.
Who could it be?
It was more curiosity than concern. There was a reason she had once been called the Fighting Witch. If they had come knowing about the rumors that she had grown weak due to the curse, they would surely regret it deeply. Esther stepped forward from her panther-like form and transformed back into her human self. As the fur disappeared, her white, smooth skin was revealed, and what was left of the fur morphed into a long coat. The transformed Esther fastened the front of her coat and looked around.
Look any longer and you'll lose your eyes.
Just then, Enkrid was seen grabbing Andrew's chin and turning his face away.
Well done.
Esther briefly praised before starting to walk.
I'll be back shortly.
Enkrid didn't ask where she was going. He knew she would handle things on her own. If there was something magical at play, she would go and stop it. It wasn't exactly a worry, but Enkrid wanted to offer some words of support, so he did.
Don't come back beaten.
Who do you think you're worrying about?
With calm confidence and a touch of arrogance, Esther, with her long black hair tied back, leapt over the wall. Before anyone noticed, Her coat had already been complemented by long leather pants and a white shirt beneath. With the curse lifted, it wasn't difficult for her to craft clothes with protective spells woven into them. She hadn't been idling away on cushions all this time. Esther, too, had been preparing in her own way. Not every wizard is a seer, but those who handle their spells properly develop a sense for predicting danger. Esther was no different. She hadn't foreseen this exact moment, but she had prepared for it. Now it was simply a matter of showing that preparation. Right after Esther left, Enkrid turned his head slightly, moving his ears a few times before speaking.
Andrew, leave some people inside the mansion and prepare to defend.
What?
There might be quite a lot of them.
Andrew followed the command without question.
Everyone inside.
A few servants, including the remaining maids, attendants, Mac, and the 5 trainees, went inside first while Andrew remained in the training yard. Enkrid glanced at him, and Andrew responded.
I should lend a hand, shouldn't I?
After all, Enkrid had mentioned there were many of them. It was more because he found it bothersome to defend and fight at the same time, but Andrew wasn't one to go down easily. The 5 trainees and Mac should be able to hold their own for a while. Not that Enkrid intended to let anyone breach the mansion in the first place. Soon a rumble shook the ground. He could feel the vibrations growing closer, and the sound sent a chill down his spine. A cloud of dust rose, and a cavalry unit appeared, galloping over the stone path. At the entrance of the mansion, a tightly packed unit blocked the view. Standing at the front was a man in ornate armor who called out,
I am Pullman Vertis. Is the man named Enkrid here?
The magistrate.
Andrew muttered under his breath, recognizing the name.
That would be me.
Enkrid raised his hand. It was clad in an impressive gauntlet, reinforced with sturdy leather and iron plates. In other words, he was armed. That much was obvious to the magistrate. There were 20 men surrounding the mansion. The cavalry unit alone numbered more than 30, with infantry trailing behind. Altogether, there were over 100 men. It seemed like the entire guard force had been mobilized. Among them, Enkrid noticed the South Gate captain, who had been present when they captured the Moonlight Beast. His face had gone pale.
Under the suspicion of murdering Viscount Bentra, I will take you into custody,
the magistrate declared from atop his horse. Well, damn, what a load of nonsense. Enkrid's expression said it all.
Bullshit.
Rem said it out loud. The magistrate's face flushed with anger at the blunt response, a stark contrast to the Southgate captain, whose face had turned completely ashen.